It was 2:13 a.m., and the glow of a laptop screen lit the room like an accusation. The number sat there, unmoving. $3,200. Tuition overdue. Rent due in 4 days. Credit card balance flirting with its limit. No dramatic music, no warning. It's just math that didn't care how tired he was. He refreshed the page, as if the number might change out of guilt. It didn't. Outside, the campus was quiet. Inside, panic hummed under his skin. He had worked every shift. He could grab late nights, early mornings, weekend hours that bled into Monday lectures. And still, the math refused to cooperate. His paycheck from the campus job hit that afternoon. After taxes, it barely covered groceries and minimum payments. Interest alone was eating more than he could earn in a week. The harder he worked, the further behind he felt. It wasn't laziness, it was arithmetic. This is the part no brochure mentions. The part where effort stops translating into progress, or doing everything right still leaves you staring at it. Screen wondering how things went so wrong so fast. It wasn't reckless. He didn't skip class. He didn't party away tuition money. He followed the plan. The plan was failing him in real time. Every notification felt like a threat. Email reminders. Payment warnings. A polite message from the landlord that didn't feel polite at all. The system was calm, professional, automated. It didn't care that he was 20 years old and already drowning. What hurt most wasn't the number. It was the realization behind it. This wasn't a temporary hiccup. This was structural. Wages that hadn't moved. Costs that never stopped climbing. A deal sold to students that no longer worked, but was still enforced like law. He closed the laptop and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Exhaustion pressed down harder than fear. Somewhere along the way, work harder had stopped being advice and started being a trap. Time was disappearing, but freedom wasn't getting closer. Silence felt heavier than any bill stacked unread nearby. This was the moment students don't post about. It's the quiet reckoning where you realize the problem isn't how many hours you can survive on caffeine. It's whether those hours are building anything at all. And that's when the question stopped being, how hard can I work? It became, what am I working on? The problem wasn't that students didn't work hard. It was that they were working inside. A model that no longer made sense. From the first day on campus, the rules were clear. Study hard, get good grades. Take on some debt. It will all pay off later. That promise used to work. Then the economy changed, and no one updated the instructions. Tuition climbed faster than wages. Rent followed. Food, transportation, insurance, textbooks, software subscriptions, fees, disguised as necessities. Everything rose except the one thing students were told to rely on: income. Part-time jobs paid almost the same as they had a decade ago, but demanded more hours, more flexibility, more energy. Time became the currency students were expected to spend endlessly, even though it depreciated faster than money. The villain wasn't a person. It was the model itself. System built on the assumption that time equals money. Show up, clock in, get paid. Repeat. For students, this meant stacking. Classes on top of shifts, sacrificing sleep for wages that barely slowed the bleeding. Every hour earned was already spent before it arrived. The cruel irony was that effort was never the issue. Students were exhausted, not lazy. They were disciplined, not careless. Yet discipline alone couldn't overcome a structure that punished them for lacking leverage. Working more hours didn't create more opportunity, just reduced the time left to think, learn, and adapt. Debt filled the gap. Credit cards, student loans. By now, pay later plans dressed up as convenience. Each one offered relief today in exchange for pressure tomorrow. The balance grew quietly while students told themselves it was temporary. Just until graduation, just until a better job, just until things stabilized. But stabilization kept moving. Further away, this is how the trap worked. Time for money. Money for survival. Survival for more time. No room to build skills that paid beyond the hour. no space to experiment, no margin for mistakes. The system didn't collapse students all at once. It squeezed them slowly, convincing them this was normal. Around him, everyone was running the same race. Same jobs, same stress. Same conversations about being broke, tired, and behind. It felt communal, which made it easier to accept. If everyone is struggling, maybe this is just how it is. That belief was the system's greatest defense, but cracks were forming. He noticed something uncomfortable. Few students weren't panicking the same way. They skipped shifts without fear. They talked about clients, not bosses, projects, not ours. Their income didn't spike during midterms or crash. During finals, it moved independently of their schedules. They weren't smarter. They weren't richer to begin with. They just weren't playing the same game. That realization was dangerous, because once you see the model, you can't unsee it. The traditional student path wasn't broken for everyone, but it was broken for anyone without time, capital, or patience to wait years for relief. The system rewarded leverage, not loyalty. This wasn't about quitting school or rejecting education. It was about understanding that degrees didn't automatically convert into income anymore. Skills did. Value did. Positioning did. None of those required permission. The fear shifted. It was no longer about failing classes or missing rent. It was about staying trapped in a model that demanded everything up front and promised results. Later, maybe, and once that fear took hold, the next realization followed naturally. If the old path wasn't designed to work anymore, then the answer couldn't be to run faster on it. It had to be something else. The shift didn't happen all at once. It started as discomfort, a quiet sense that something about the way money worked no longer lined up with the way students were told to live. Began paying attention, not to motivational quotes or overnight success stories, but to patterns. Who was stressed? Who wasn't? Who seemed insulated from the chaos everyone else accepted as normal? The difference wasn't intelligence. It wasn't privilege. It was leverage. Most students were trapped selling hours. Show up, work, get paid, repeat. Miss a shift, and the money disappeared. Get sick, fall behind. They take a break, and the system punished you instantly. Income was directly tied to exhaustion. That connection felt normal until you questioned it. And once questioned, it felt absurd. Then he noticed the outliers. Students who earned while sleeping, while studying, while skipping shifts without panic. Their income didn't rise because they worked more hours. It rose because the value of what they offered increased. Skills, systems, outcomes. They weren't paid for effort. They were paid for results. That realization was unsettling, because it exposed a truth most students were never told. The market doesn't reward how hard you work. It rewards how useful you are, how replaceable you aren't, and how well you solve problems that matter. Side hustles weren't about hustle culture. They were about control. Control over time, over income, for trajectory. They allowed students to step outside the rigid exchange of time for money and into something more flexible, something scalable, something unfair to the old model. 22.5 made this shift unavoidable. Technology erased barriers that once required degrees, offices, and years of gatekeeping. AI tools lowered skill floors. Remote work removed geography. Global marketplaces connected students to clients who didn't care about age, GPA, or resumes. They cared about outcomes. The idea of earning $150 an hour sounded ridiculous at first. Not because it was impossible, but because it challenged everything students had been conditioned to believe. That income was linear. That youth meant low pay. That high earnings required permission from institutions that moved slowly and paid cautiously. But when he broke it down, the math wasn't crazy. If a business made $10,000 from a problem you solved and paid you $1,000, that wasn't exploitation. That was value exchange. If your skills saved someone time, money, or stress, your age became irrelevant. The market didn't ask how old you were. It asked what you could do. The villain revealed itself clearly now. It wasn't lack of opportunity. It was lack of awareness. Students weren't broke because they lacked options. They were broke because no one taught them where leverage lived. The system benefited from that ignorance. Side hustles rewired thinking. Instead of asking how many hours can I work, the question became what problem can I solve? Instead of chasing shifts, students chased skills. Instead of waiting for raises, they set prices. Income stopped being a ceiling imposed from above and became a variable they could influence. Fear didn't disappear, changed shape. Fear of instability replaced fear of stagnation. And for the first time, instability felt preferable. Because instability meant movement. This wasn't about quitting jobs overnight or gambling on dreams. It was about experimenting. Learning, testing, failing cheaply, building competence quietly. Side hustles became laboratories for financial independence. Places where mistakes taught faster than lectures ever could. Once that door opened, it couldn't be closed. The question was no longer whether side hustles worked. The evidence was everywhere. The question became which ones created real leverage, which ones just recycled the same trap with better branding. And that's when the first real opportunities appeared. Hiding in plain sight, the first realization didn't lead to action immediately, led to observation. He watched how money moved online the same way people once. Watched factories and offices. Quietly, constantly, without caring who was awake or exhausted. The digital economy didn't punch a clock. It rewarded output, not attendance. That's where the first door opened. Side Hustle 1 wasn't glamorous. It didn't involve flashy branding or viral success. It was a AI-powered automation. Students using tools most people treated like toys to solve real business problems. Scheduling, email sorting, content generation, customer support, repetitive, work that drained time from companies, but demanded accuracy. Businesses didn't want effort. They wanted relief. At first, it sounded too simple. How could using software justify high pay? But then the math made sense. If a student automated 10 hours of work a week for a small business, saving the owner time and payroll costs, paying $100 an hour wasn't generosity, it was efficiency. Businesses didn't care how long it took you to build the system, they cared that it worked. The early days were uncomfortable. Students doubted themselves. They charged too little. They feared being exposed as inexperienced. But experience compounded quickly. One workflow led to another. One client led to referrals. Suddenly, the same student who struggled to clear $15 an hour was billing triple digits because the value they delivered wasn't measured in minutes. The real shift wasn't income. It was perception. They stopped seeing themselves as workers and started seeing themselves as problem solvers. That identity change was irreversible. Side Hustle 2 arrived through a different door. Short-form video editing, at Hollywood level. Production, not expensive equipment. It's just understanding attention. Brands needed content. Creators needed reach. Platforms rewarded speed, clarity, and consistency. Students who grew up consuming short-form content instinctively understood pacing, hooks, and retention better than most agencies charging 5 figures. At first, clients paid per video, then per batch, then per month. Editing stopped being about cutting clips and became about driving outcomes, engagement, watch time, conversions. When results followed, prices followed. $100 an hour stopped sounding arrogant and started sounding fair. The villain here wasn't competition. It was undervaluation. Students assumed their familiarity with these platforms made the work basic. Businesses saw it differently. They saw growth. And growth justified budgets. Both hustles shared something important. They scaled skill, not hours. Once you learned the system, each additional client required less effort. That's where leverage lived, not in working longer, but in working smarter, with tools that multiplied impact. Mistakes happened, projects failed, clients ghosted, software broke, algorithms shifted. But none of those setbacks destroyed momentum, because the skills remained. Students learned to adapt quickly, because the market demanded it. That adaptability became another form of value. The emotional shift was subtle, but powerful. Anxiety, gave way to focus. Panic transformed into planning. Income fluctuations became manageable because students weren't dependent on a single paycheck. They diversified clients. They built buffers. They learned to say no. The campus job didn't disappear overnight. It became optional. That alone changed posture. When you don't need a shift, you negotiate differently. You think differently. You move differently. What made these hustles dangerous to the old system wasn't the money. It was the mindset they required: initiative over permission, experimentation over certainty, pricing based on outcomes, not hours. Students who succeeded here didn't start confident. They became confident by surviving discomfort. They sent awkward first messages. They pitched without guarantees. They learned publicly and improved privately. Each small win reinforced a new belief. Income wasn't fixed. It responded to skill. The system had taught them to wait. These hustles taught them to act. But as powerful as digital skills were, they weren't the only escape route. Not everyone wanted screens and software. Not everyone wanted to compete in online marketplaces. And that's when another realization surfaced. Some of the most profitable opportunities weren't loud. They weren't trending. They were ignored, and the students who noticed them next would quietly change their financial trajectory forever. The next shift didn't come from flashy tools or trending platforms. It came from something far less exciting and far more powerful: specialization. While most students chased anything that paid, a smaller group started narrowing their focus. They stopped trying to be useful to everyone and started becoming indispensable to someone. That's where high-ticket freelance services entered the picture. COPYWRITING, web design, SEO, email funnels, landing pages. Boring words to most people. Expensive solutions to businesses bleeding money quietly. Every company wanted growth, but few understood how to build it. Students who took the time to learn one narrow skill and apply it deeply discovered something unexpected. The market didn't care that they were students. It cared that revenue moved when they touched a project. The early phase was uncomfortable. Charging felt unnatural. Imposter syndrome screamed louder with every invoice sent. Students underpriced themselves, hoping gratitude would make up the difference. It didn't. Clients respected clarity, not humility. The moment pricing shifted from hours worked to outcomes delivered, everything changed. A landing page that increased conversions by 10% wasn't design work. It was profit. An email sequence that revived cold leads wasn't writing. Was revenue recovery. When students framed their work around results, $150 an hour stopped sounding ambitious. It sounded conservative. This hustle demanded patience. Skills took time to sharpen. Feedback was brutal. Revisions were endless. But unlike campus jobs, effort here stacked. Every project built reputation. Every win became proof. Confidence grew, quietly, rooted in competence rather than hope. Then came the second quiet opportunity: tutoring. Not the kind everyone assumed. Not babysitting homework or cramming for finals. This was skill tutoring. Teaching what the system never did. Software. Tools, coding basics, AI workflows, test prep shortcuts, language fluency, even financial literacy. Authority shifted when students realized something powerful. You didn't need to know everything. You only needed to be one step ahead. Businesses paid consultants thousands for clarity students already had. Peers paid gladly to shortcut confusion. Knowledge, once dismissed as ordinary, became monnaie able. At first, rates were low. $20 an hour? $30? Enough to justify time, not transformation. But as demand grew and results spoke, prices followed. Group sessions replaced one-on-one. Packages replaced hourly billing. Income multiplied without multiplying effort. The villain here wasn't competition, it was self-doubt. Students hesitated to charge because they feared rejection. But rejection was cheaper than stagnation. Each no clarified positioning. Each yes validated value. Pricing became a filter instead of a plea. What made these hustles powerful wasn't speed. It was durability. Skills didn't vanish when algorithms changed. Knowledge didn't depreciate overnight. These income streams survived semesters, schedules, and stress. They bent instead of breaking. Students began to notice a deeper change. Their relationship with money matured. They planned instead. Reacted. They saved intentionally. They reinvested in tools, education, and networks. Income felt earned, not accidental. That psychological shift mattered more than the numbers. Failure still showed up. Clients disappeared. Sessions got canceled. Projects underperformed. But the response changed. Students analyzed instead of panicked, adjusted instead of quitting. Resilience became a muscle strengthened through repetition. The campus job faded into the background, not because it was bad, but because it was limited. These hustles offered upside the job never could. Growth wasn't capped by policy or schedule. It was capped by skill and imagination. Students who once avoided responsibility now chased it. They understood that accountability created leverage. When your income depends on results, you pay attention differently. You listen harder. You learn faster. You improve relentlessly. What surprised them most wasn't the money. It was the respect. Clients treated them like partners. Peers asked for advice. Professors noticed confidence. Identity shifted from student to operator. That shift was irreversible. Quiet money doesn't announce itself. It doesn't trend. It compounds. While others scrolled, these students built. While others complained, they specialized. And slowly, without spectacle, their financial reality changed. But even this wasn't the ceiling. Skills created income. Knowledge created authority. Yet both still required active participation. Was leveraged, but not fully freed. That's when the conversation moved beyond skills and into systems. Beyond labor and into leverage. Because the next step wasn't about working better, it was about building something that worked even when you didn't buy now. Pattern was clear. Effort alone didn't create freedom. What mattered was leverage putting. Time, skill, and strategy to work in ways that multiplied results. For some students, this meant stepping beyond digital services and into systems that could run without them. Side hustle number 5 was about digital products and micro SaaS tools. Students began creating templates, Notion dashboards, AI prompt packs, and small apps that solved a real, repeatable problem. One template could be sold hundreds of times with no extra effort. One micro tool could automate a business task for dozens of clients. Unlike hourly work, each sale wasn't tied to their immediate presence. Value was now decoupled from effort. Students who learned to design, test, and market these products discovered that income could compound. A single weekend of work could produce weeks of passive revenue. The thrill wasn't just in making money, it was in seeing systems work while they slept, studied, or even traveled. Side hustle number 6 took leverage offline, but in a deceptively simple way. Local lead generation and service arbitrage. Students identified gaps in small markets, plumbers, tutors, landscapers, boutique services, then acted as the middleman. They connected clients to providers, charging a cut for the convenience and scale they offered. They weren't delivering the service themselves, but every transaction created real revenue. It was a lesson in delegation and value creation. First time a student earned $200 for a few hours of research and calls. The reality hit. Money didn't always require sweat. It required strategy. Both hustles demanded patience, research, and attention to detail. Early attempts failed. A poorly designed template, a mispriced service, or an ineffective pitch could mean zero sales. But each failure refined understanding. Systems were iterated, processes streamlined, and results measured. Students learned quickly that leverage didn't guarantee instant reward, but it guaranteed growth if they applied. Discipline consistently. The psychological shift was profound. Before they had traded every minute for $1, now hours spent on learning or refining a system, multiplied into income streams that persisted. Fear of instability faded because the system protected them. Unlike a job, failure didn't erase hours worked. It informed the next step by combining skill with leverage. Students were no longer bound by the limits of their schedules. Income was no longer finite. They could take vacations, focus on studies, or explore new opportunities, knowing that systems templates, apps, connections kept generating results. The grind was replaced with strategy, effort with design. Still, this stage demanded a higher-level mindset. Students had to value results over busyness, measurement over intuition, and patience over immediate gratification. A deficit leverage magnified mistakes as easily as it magnified wins, understanding the mechanics of each system, the target audience, and the real-world impact of their product or service became crucial. And yet, for those willing to think beyond hours, the rewards were undeniable. Income no longer followed the clock. It followed intelligence, creativity, and strategic execution. But even with leverage working in their favor, the final side hustle would reveal the ultimate multiplier, the one that could turn $150 an hour into sustainable, scalable financial independence. That's where mindset and ownership intersected, and where the real transformation began. The seventh side hustle wasn't about tools, clients, or even technical skills. It was about positioning, influence, and ownership. Ability to transform knowledge into a reliable income stream that scaled beyond time. Students discovered that by building a personal brand, creating faceless YouTube channels, newsletters, or niche content platforms, they could monetize trust and expertise, not just effort. At first, the numbers seemed unreal. A single video, a newsletter issue, or a digital course could generate hundreds of dollars while they slept. The trick wasn't creating content constantly. It was creating content that solved problems, answered questions, and delivered measurable value. Age, experience, and location no longer dictated earning potential. The market only cared about outcomes. This was where mindset became everything. Charging $150 per hour or its equivalent through productized outcomes required confidence grounded in skill. Students had to believe their work had tangible impact, even when no one else did. Early failures were brutal. Low engagement, unsubscribes, abandoned projects. But every misstep refined strategy, taught audience behavior, and built resilience. They weren't hustling blindly. They were learning the mechanics of influence, trust, and scalable income. Ownership changed the game. Unlike client work or templates, the assets belonged to them. Every subscriber, every follower, every product was an investment in their future self. The leverage wasn't just financial, it was compounding credibility. Each small win added social proof, making the next sale easier, the next client easier to convince, the next venture more plausible. The psychological impact was immediate. No longer bound by hourly rates, students began to see income as a reflection of value delivered, not time spent. Every hour invested in growth, research, or creation amplified results exponentially. Fear of failure diminished because control had shifted from external forces to internal strategy. The game was no longer survival, it was designed. By this point, a pattern emerged. All previous hustles, automation, video editing, digital products, arbitrage, had been stepping stones. They built skills, confidence, and proof. But personal branding and monetized knowledge amplified these lessons into an entirely new dimension. The side hustle wasn't just a way to survive. It was a way to thrive independently of traditional systems. Students who embraced this shift no longer worried about hourly ceilings. $150 an hour was not just a figure. It was a mental framework. It represented recognition of their worth, strategic thinking, and the courage to monetize intelligence, creativity, and execution. They understood now that income was always negotiable if value was undeniable. Even as success scaled, challenges remained. Algorithms changed, trends shifted, competition emerged. But students who mastered this approach realized that the real power wasn't in content, it was in the mindset. The ability to identify opportunities, execute strategically, and build leverage that no system could take away. And once that lesson sank in, the final question arose naturally. How do you use this newfound power to create lasting financial independence rather than just temporary wins? That question would define the next stage of their journey. By now, the story was clear. Money wasn't a passive reward. It wasn't something that fell from opportunity or privilege. For students, income, freedom, and financial stability were choices determined by where they invested time, which skills they developed, and how they structured their efforts for leverage. The $150 per hour wasn't magic. It was intentionality. It was discipline. It was the ability to recognize where value existed and position oneself to capture it. The overarching lesson: effort alone is insufficient. Working harder on a minimum wage, shift, or stacking hours in a cafe only increased exhaustion, not financial security. True impact came from strategic thinking, compounding skills, and designing systems that worked even when the student wasn't actively laboring. Each side hustle taught the same truth: leverage beats labor every time. Time for money exchanges are limited. Value for results exchanges are limitless. But the mental shift mattered even more than the technical steps. Students learned that income is directly proportional to confidence in value, willingness to solve problems, and courage to experiment. They understood that rejection and failure weren't signals to quit, they were data points. Each note refined their approach, tightened their offers, and sharpened their pricing. Fear became a tool, not a barrier. The market rewarded those who acted despite uncertainty. Another core lesson: ownership amplifies everything. Whether through personal branding, products, or systems, creating something that belonged to them transformed work from transient income into enduring equity. Every asset, every client, every subscriber became part of a foundation for sustainable financial growth. Passive elements compounded active effort, and students finally glimpsed how financial independence could be engineered rather than hoped for. Most importantly, this lesson extended beyond dollars. It was a blueprint for decision-making, self-belief, and problem-solving. The same mindset that enabled $150 per hour could be applied to negotiation, investing, entrepreneurship, and long-term wealth building. It wasn't just a side hustle. It was a framework for life. The takeaway for viewers was simple but powerful. Your income is rarely fixed. Your value is not predetermined. Your opportunities are negotiable. Every dollar earned through leverage reinforced the principle that control over money begins with control over choices, skills, and mindset. Students who grasped this principle weren't just earning. They were learning to think like architects of their own financial destiny. And with that understanding, the story reached its natural pause. The real challenge now wasn't discovering side hustles or earning a high hourly rate. It was deciding what to do with this power and how to let it shape a future that went far beyond the next paycheck. The path forward would test focus, discipline, and vision. But for those willing to embrace it, the possibilities were limitless.